Lazy. That single word cut through the conference room like a blade, spoken by a man who had never worked a day in his life for anything that wasn't handed to him. Lazy, he repeated, his eyes fixed on me as 20 other employees shifted uncomfortably in their seats. I felt my hands tremble as I gripped my notepad, watching Mr. Richardson lean back in his leather chair with that smug expression I'd grown to despise. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across his face as he delivered what felt like a public execution of my character. Which country are you listening from? Tell us in the comments below. My name is Maya Johnson, and 6 months ago I thought I had finally made it. After years of struggle, I'd landed what seemed like the perfect job at Henderson and Associates, a prestigious marketing firm in downtown Atlanta. The glass building sparkled in the morning sun, and I remember feeling like I belonged there as I walked through those revolving doors on my first day, my briefcase in hand and hope in my heart. I was 26 years old, a black woman with big dreams and an even bigger work ethic. Growing up in East Atlanta, I'd watched my mother, Diane Johnson, clean offices at night and serve tables during the day just to keep food on our table. She'd come home at midnight, her hands raw from industrial cleaning solutions, her feet swollen from standing for 14 hours straight. But she'd still help me with my homework, sitting at our tiny kitchen table under the flickering overhead light, her tired eyes fighting sleep as she explained algebra problems she'd taught herself just to help me. Baby, she'd say, her voice hoarse from exhaustion, education is the only thing they can't take away from you. They can take your job, your house, your car, but what's in your head, that's yours forever. Those words became my anthem, tattooed on my soul long before I understood their true weight. By day, I worked as a junior marketing coordinator at Henderson and Associates, earning $42,000 a year, more money than my family had ever seen, but barely enough to cover my modest apartment rent, student loan payments from undergrad, and basic living expenses in Atlanta. By night, from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., I stocked shelves at Target, earning an additional $15 an hour. The fluorescent aisles became my second home, where I'd listen to audiobooks on constitutional law while restocking shampoo bottles and organizing clothing racks. On weekends, I waitressed at Mama Ruby's Soul Food Kitchen, a small diner in my old neighborhood where the owner, Mrs. Ruby Washington, had known me since I was 12. She'd let me study in the back booth during slow periods, bringing me sweet tea and cornbread while I highlighted passages in my prep books for the LSAT. Every spare moment was spent with my nose buried in law books, because my real dream wasn't marketing, it was becoming an attorney. I'd been accepted to Emory University School of Law for the following fall, a moment that had me crying tears of joy in the parking lot of the post office where I'd anxiously checked my mail every day for weeks. But the acceptance letter came with a sobering reality. Tuition was $73,000 a year. Even with the partial scholarship I'd received for academic excellence, I needed to raise nearly $150,000 over 3 years. The number felt astronomical, impossible, but I'd learned long ago that impossible was just another word for hasn't happened yet. Most of my coworkers at Henderson didn't know about my other jobs. I was careful to schedule my shifts so they wouldn't interfere with my marketing responsibilities. I'd perfected the art of changing from my business attire into my Target uniform in the employee parking garage, transforming from marketing Maya into night shift Maya in under 5 minutes. I kept baby wipes in my car to remove any makeup that might smudge under the bright store lights, and I always carried breath mints to mask the coffee I consumed in dangerous quantities to stay alert. My daily routine was a carefully choreographed dance of exhaustion and determination. I'd wake up at 6 a.m. after getting home from Target at 6:30 a.m., shower quickly, grab coffee and a protein bar, and be at Henderson by 7:30 a.m., a full hour before my official start time. During lunch breaks, I'd sit in my car and study flashcards for the Georgia bar exam, even though I wouldn't take it for years. I treated preparation like a religion because I knew I couldn't afford to fail. For the first few months, everything seemed perfect. I exceeded every deadline, brought fresh ideas to campaigns, and even landed a major client, Peachtree Athletic, where, through cold calling during my lunch breaks, I'd researched their company for hours, identified their target demographic, and crafted a pitch that aligned perfectly with their brand values. When they signed a 6-figure contract, my supervisor, Janet Martinez, praised my initiative and creativity. "Maya, you've got something special," Janet told me, standing by my desk with a genuine smile. "Your approach to the Peachtree campaign was brilliant. You didn't just sell them marketing services, you understood their business better than they did." Janet was a Latina woman in her 40s who had climbed the corporate ladder through sheer determination and exceptional skill. She became my mentor, teaching me the unwritten rules of corporate culture, sharing strategies for navigating office politics, and advocating for me in meetings I wasn't invited to attend. She understood the extra challenges that women of color faced in predominantly white corporate environments. The key, she told me during one of our informal mentoring sessions, is to be so excellent that they can't ignore you, but not so threatening that they feel the need to cut you down. It's a delicate balance and it's exhausting, but it's the reality we work in. I felt like I was proving that hard work really does pay off in America. My cubicle was organized and efficient, decorated with a small succulent plant and a framed photo of my mother at my college graduation. I'd arrive early and stay late, volunteering for additional projects and consistently delivering work that exceeded expectations. My performance reviews were stellar, and I'd even been mentioned in the company newsletter for my innovative approach to social media marketing. But there was one person who seemed determined to dim my shine, Mr. Richardson, the Senior Vice President of Client Relations. Theodore Richardson III was a tall, imposing man in his 50s with silver hair perfectly styled, expensive suits that probably cost more than I made in a month, and a perpetual scowl that seemed reserved especially for me. His corner office was decorated with diplomas from Yale, photographs of him golfing with prominent Atlanta businessmen, and a collection of crystal awards that caught the light from his floor-to-ceiling windows. From day one, I noticed how his demeanor changed when he spoke to me compared to my white colleagues. With them, he was jovial, asking about weekend plans and family vacations. With me, his tone was colder, his questions more pointed, his criticism harsher. When my colleague Brad presented an idea, Mr. Richardson would nod thoughtfully and ask follow-up questions. When I presented similar ideas, he'd interrupt with concerns about market research and target demographics. I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe he was just demanding. Maybe he pushed everyone equally hard. But deep down I knew better. There were subtle signs that accumulated like paper cuts, each one small but collectively devastating. The way he'd interrupt me in meetings, cutting me off mid-sentence to redirect the conversation. The way he'd question my ideas more thoroughly than others, demanding additional research and documentation that wasn't required from my colleagues. The way he'd make comments about urban marketing when discussing campaigns I'd worked on, as if my perspective was inherently limited rather than valuable. During team meetings, he'd often forget my name, calling me the junior coordinator, or simply pointing in my direction when assigning tasks. He'd praise my white colleague Sarah for initiative when she stayed late to finish a project, but never acknowledge the fact that I was consistently the first person in the office and often the last to leave. The microaggressions were constant and subtle. When I contributed to brainstorming sessions, he'd respond with phrases like, "That's an interesting perspective," in a tone that suggested it was interesting but not valuable. When clients complimented my work, he'd redirect the praise to the team effort, rather than acknowledging my individual contribution. When I suggested innovative approaches to campaigns, he'd table the discussion for further consideration, and then present remarkably similar ideas weeks later as his own insights. Still, I persevered. I had to. Law school was depending on it, and more importantly, my future was depending on it. I worked harder, stayed later, and smiled through every microaggression. I documented everything, not because I planned to take legal action but because my mother had taught me to keep records of important things. I maintained a small notebook where I recorded dates, times, and details of every interaction, every slight, every moment when I felt my professionalism was questioned. I was living proof that you could rise above circumstances, that talent and determination could overcome any obstacle. Or so I thought. My world was about to shift in ways I couldn't imagine, and Mr. Richardson's true nature was about to reveal itself in the most devastating way possible. The morning that changed everything started like any other Tuesday in October. The air carried that crisp bite of autumn in Georgia, and the leaves on the trees outside Henderson and Associates were beginning their slow transformation from green to gold. I arrived at the office at 7:30 a.m., a full hour before my official start time, carrying my usual breakfast of black coffee and a granola bar. The office was quiet, with only the cleaning crew finishing up their rounds, their quiet Spanish conversations echoing softly through the empty corridors. I was at my desk, working on a comprehensive presentation for a potential client, Atlanta Sports Marketing Group, when I heard Mr. Richardson's voice echoing from his corner office. The building's acoustics were strange, sounds carried through the ventilation system in unexpected ways. He was on a conference call, but his voice carried through the thin walls with painful clarity. "I don't know what Janet sees in that girl," he was saying, his tone casual and conversational, as if he were discussing the weather rather than destroying someone's reputation. "She's always tired, always distracted. You can see it in her eyes during meetings. Probably out partying all night like most of them do. My fingers froze over my keyboard. The words hit me like ice water and I felt my stomach drop. Was he talking about me? I strained to hear more, my heart pounding so loudly I was afraid it would give away my presence. You know how they are, he continued, and I could hear the cruel smile in his voice, that particular tone that white people sometimes used when they thought no one was listening. They want everything handed to them. No work ethic. Give them a fancy job title and they think they've made it. But when it comes to actually performing, to putting in the real work that this industry demands, they fall short every time. Another voice on the call, muffled but audible, seemed to agree. It's the same story everywhere. They check the diversity box, but they don't have the background, the connections, the cultural understanding necessary for high-level client relations. Exactly, Mr. Richardson replied. I mean, look at her presentation style. Very urban. Very street. Our clients expect a certain level of sophistication, a certain polish that frankly I don't think she can deliver. It's not her fault, it's just cultural differences. But we can't lower our standards to accommodate that. The conversation continued, but I heard it through a haze of humiliation and rage. They were discussing my work ethic, my professionalism, my very worth as a human being, using coded language that felt both familiar and devastating. I wanted to march into his office and confront him, to defend myself against these vicious lies, but I needed this job. I needed the steady income for law school tuition. I needed health insurance. I needed the professional reference that would help me transition to my legal career. So I swallowed my pride, just like I'd been taught to do my whole life. I saved my work, closed my laptop, and went to the bathroom where I splashed cold water on my face and stared at my reflection. The woman looking back at me was tired, yes, but not from partying. She was tired from working 3 jobs. Her eyes were strained, yes, but from studying law books until 3 a.m., not from being distracted at work. I returned to my desk and threw myself into my work with renewed intensity, as if excellence could somehow shield me from the poison of their prejudice. But the words echoed in my head all day: lazy, distracted, urban, street, cultural differences. Each phrase was a small dagger, carefully designed to cut without leaving visible wounds. The real blow came 3 weeks later during our monthly team meeting. It was a Thursday morning, and the conference room was filled with the usual suspects. The marketing team, several account managers, and Mr. Richardson presiding over the meeting like a king holding court. The room smelled of fresh coffee and pastries that someone had brought from a bakery downtown, but my stomach was too nervous to contemplate food. We were discussing quarterly performance reviews, and Mr. Richardson was going through each team member's contributions to the department. When he got to my colleague Brad, he praised his innovative thinking and client relationship skills. When he discussed Sarah, he highlighted her attention to detail and professional presentation. But when he got to my name, his expression shifted to one of barely concealed disdain. Maya Johnson, he said, consulting his notes with theatrical deliberation, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. Junior marketing coordinator. Now, I've been observing Maya's performance closely, and I have some concerns. The room fell silent. I felt 20 pairs of eyes turned toward me, and my face burned with embarrassment. The fluorescent lights suddenly seemed too bright, the air too thick. I gripped my pen so tightly my knuckles went white. Maya seems to lack the energy and focus required for this position, he continued, his voice taking on a patronizing tone that made my skin crawl. She appears tired during meetings, distracted during presentations. Her work quality, while adequate, lacks the enthusiasm I expect from someone in their first year with the company. I opened my mouth to defend myself, but he held up a hand to silence me, as if I were a child interrupting adult conversation. Furthermore, he said, leaning forward with that cruel smile that had haunted my nightmares, I have to question her commitment to this company. Is she really giving us her best effort, or is she just coasting by, expecting us to carry her? Because frankly, in today's competitive market, we need team members who are fully invested, who bring their A-game every single day. The word hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Lazy. He called me lazy in front of the entire team. Me who worked 3 jobs to pay for law school. Me who stayed up until 2 a.m. studying contract law after stocking shelves for 8 hours. Me who had never missed a deadline or failed to deliver on a promise. Me who had landed the biggest client the department had seen in 6 months. I think Maya needs to seriously consider whether she has what it takes to succeed in a competitive environment like this, Mr. Richardson concluded, his voice dripping with false concern. Because frankly, I'm not seeing the drive and dedication we need. And in a department that prides itself on excellence, that's simply not acceptable. The meeting continued, but I heard nothing else. The words echoed in my head: lazy, coasting, lacking drive, not acceptable. I thought about my mother, scrubbing floors at 2 a.m. to pay for my college textbooks, her hands cracked and bleeding from harsh chemicals but her spirit unbroken. I thought about every scholarship application I'd filled out, every essay I'd written about overcoming adversity, every night I'd fallen asleep at my desk while studying, my face pressed against pages of legal precedents and constitutional amendments. Around the table, my colleagues avoided eye contact. Some looked genuinely uncomfortable, shifting in their chairs and staring at their notebooks. Others seemed relieved that they weren't in the crosshairs. A few looked sympathetic but said nothing because speaking up would risk their own positions. After what felt like an eternity, the meeting ended. As people filed out, several coworkers approached me with sympathetic looks, but their pity only made it worse. "Don't take it personally," whispered Tom from accounting. "He's tough on everyone." But I knew that wasn't true. I'd never seen him humiliate anyone else so publicly, so thoroughly. Janet pulled me aside in the hallway, her expression a mixture of anger and concern. "Maya, I want you to know that I completely disagree with what just happened there. Your work is excellent. You're one of our most reliable team members and that Peachtree campaign was brilliant. Don't let him get in your head." But the damage was done. Word would spread. Other departments would hear about it. My reputation would be tainted. The whispers would follow me through the corridors. Maya Johnson, the lazy one, the one who couldn't cut it, the diversity hire who didn't work out. That night, as I changed into my Target uniform in the parking garage, tears blurred my vision. For the first time since I'd started working 3 jobs, I questioned whether it was worth it. Maybe Mr. Richardson was right. Maybe I was fooling myself thinking I could juggle everything. Maybe I was in over my head. Maybe I should just accept my limitations and stop reaching for dreams that were clearly beyond my grasp. But as I walked into Target and saw my reflection in the store windows, a young black woman in a red vest, shoulders squared with determination despite the tears on her cheeks, I remembered who I was. I wasn't lazy. I was a warrior. And warriors don't surrender just because the battle gets difficult. The weeks following that humiliating meeting were among the darkest of my professional life. Mr. Richardson's words had planted seeds of doubt not just in the minds of my colleagues, but in my own mind as well. I found myself second-guessing every decision, overanalyzing every interaction, wondering if people saw me the way he described. The subtle signs of discrimination became more pronounced, like a cancer that had been growing in secret but was now metastasizing openly. Colleagues who used to greet me warmly now offered polite but distant smiles. My ideas and brainstorming sessions were met with lukewarm responses, even when they were later adopted and proven successful. I was excluded from informal lunch meetings and after-work social gatherings where real business relationships were built. Sarah, who had started at the company 2 weeks after me, was invited to represent our department at a major industry conference in Miami. When I asked Janet why I hadn't been considered, she looked uncomfortable and said that Mr. Richardson felt Sarah would be a better cultural fit for the client base at the conference. The phrase made my skin crawl because I knew exactly what it meant. During client presentations, Mr. Richardson would introduce other team members by highlighting their achievements and qualifications. When he introduced me, it was always generic. "This is Maya, one of our junior coordinators." The difference was subtle but devastating, positioning me as interchangeable rather than valuable. But the worst part was the self-doubt. Late at night, as I restocked inventory at Target, I'd replay the meeting in my head. Was I really giving my best effort at Henderson and Associates? Was my exhaustion from working multiple jobs affecting my performance? Was I deluding myself about my capabilities? The questions followed me like shadows, whispering that maybe he was right, maybe I wasn't cut out for this level of professional success. My performance at all 3 jobs began to suffer. At the diner, I dropped a plate of Mrs. Ruby's famous fried chicken, and she pulled me aside with concern. "Baby girl, what's eating you? You've been here for years and never broke as much as a coffee cup." I broke down and told her everything, about Mr. Richardson's public humiliation, about the way my colleagues now treated me, about my growing fear that maybe I really was lazy, maybe I really didn't belong in the corporate world. Mrs. Ruby, a 70-year-old black woman who had survived segregation, Jim Crow, and decades of discrimination, listened without judgment. When I finished, she grabbed my hands with her weathered fingers. "Let me tell you something, child," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had fought battles I couldn't imagine. "When I was your age, they wouldn't even let me eat at the lunch counters downtown. They told me I was inferior, that I belonged in the kitchen serving white folks, not sitting at their tables. You know what I did? I shook my head, wiping away tears. I opened my own restaurant. I proved that I could run a business better than any of those white men who looked down on me. Maya, you're not lazy. You're the hardest working person I know. That man is trying to break your spirit because your success threatens his sense of superiority. Don't let him win. Her words gave me temporary strength, but the challenges at Henderson and Associates continued to mount. Mr. Richardson found fault with everything I did. He criticized the font choice in my presentations, questioned my research methods, and constantly reminded me that I was still learning in front of clients and colleagues. Every interaction became a minefield where one wrong word could trigger another public humiliation. My grades in my evening law prep classes began to slip. I'd enrolled in a pre-law program at Georgia State to prepare for law school, but the stress from work was affecting my concentration. During one particularly difficult constitutional law lecture, I found myself nodding off. The professor, Dr. Williams, a distinguished black woman in her 60s with graying hair and kind eyes, asked me to stay after class. Maya, she said gently, gathering her papers while the other students filed out, you're one of my brightest students, but lately you seem overwhelmed. Is everything all right? I broke down and told her everything about my 3 jobs, about law school tuition, about Mr. Richardson's accusations, about my growing fear that maybe I wasn't smart enough or strong enough to become an attorney. Dr. Williams listened without judgment, nodding occasionally with the understanding of someone who had faced similar challenges. Let me tell you something, she said when I finished. In 1975, when I was applying to law school, a dean told me I was taking a spot away from a man who could better use the education. He said women, especially black women, lacked the intellectual rigor for legal practice. He suggested I consider nursing or teaching instead, more appropriate careers for someone like me. What did you do? I asked. I proved him wrong. Not by working twice as hard, though I did that too, but by refusing to internalize his limitations. Maya, you're not lazy. You're not lacking drive. You're a young woman juggling multiple responsibilities while pursuing a dream that terrifies small-minded people like your boss. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a thick legal textbook. This is my copy of Federal Employment Law, the same edition I used when I was writing my dissertation on workplace discrimination. I want you to have it. Study it. Learn it. Because knowledge is power, and power is the only thing bullies like your boss understand. Her words gave me strength, but the challenges at Henderson and Associates continued to escalate. One particularly devastating incident occurred during a client presentation for Sports Tech Solutions, a major athletic equipment manufacturer. I'd spent weeks researching their target demographic, analyzing their competitors, and developing a comprehensive marketing strategy. The campaign I proposed was innovative, data-driven, and perfectly aligned with their brand values. I'd worked until 3 a.m. for a week straight, perfecting every slide, rehearsing every transition, anticipating every possible question. The presentation was scheduled for 2 p.m. on a Wednesday, and I arrived at the office that morning feeling prepared and confident. But during the presentation, Mr. Richardson repeatedly interrupted me, questioning my statistics and suggesting that my approach was too niche for their mainstream market. Every time I tried to explain my research, he would cut me off with concerns about market penetration and demographic alignment. Maya's approach is certainly creative, he said to the clients, his tone suggesting that creativity was a liability rather than an asset. But I think we need to take a more traditional approach. Something with broader appeal. He then proceeded to present his own version of my strategy, describing it as a more refined approach that addressed the sophistication of Sports Tech's client base. The clients looked uncomfortable as he essentially dismantled my presentation in real time, offering his own ideas that were remarkably similar to mine but presented as more professional alternatives. After the meeting, the clients praised the comprehensive strategy that Mr. Richardson had presented, my strategy, with his modifications and reframing. He got the credit for the 6-figure contract that resulted from my research. I got a lecture about understanding your audience and tailoring your presentation style to client expectations. Maya, he said, standing by my desk later that afternoon with a patronizing smile, I hope you learned something from today's presentation. Our clients expect a certain level of sophistication. Your ideas have potential, but the delivery needs work. Maybe you should observe more experienced team members before taking the lead on major presentations. That night, I sat in my car outside Target, staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror. I looked exhausted, defeated. The woman staring back at me seemed like a stranger, someone who had lost her fire, her confidence, her sense of self-worth. For a moment, I considered quitting Henderson and Associates. Maybe I could focus on my other jobs, save money more slowly, and attend law school part-time. Maybe Mr. Richardson was right. Maybe I wasn't cut out for the corporate world. But then I thought about all the black women who had paved the way for me. Women like Dr. Williams, like Mrs. Ruby, like my mother, like countless others who had faced even worse discrimination and refused to back down. I thought about the little girl I used to be, sitting in my mother's workplace after school, watching her clean offices with quiet dignity while I did homework at abandoned desks. I pulled out my phone and started researching employment discrimination law, reading case studies and legal precedents until my eyes burned from the blue light. I began documenting every incident, every slight, every moment when my professionalism was questioned or my contributions were minimized. They don't get to decide who I am, I whispered to myself in the empty parking lot. They don't get to define my worth. I started a detailed journal, recording dates, times, witnesses, and exact quotes. I researched Georgia employment law, federal discrimination statutes, and corporate policies. If Mr. Richardson wanted to play games, I would play to win. But I wouldn't play by his rules. The opportunity for vindication came from an unexpected source: the Georgia State Bar Association's annual Young Lawyers Division competition. Each year, they sponsored a legal brief writing contest for pre-law students, with the winner receiving a $50,000 scholarship toward law school tuition and a summer internship at Kilpatrick Townsend in Stockton, one of Atlanta's most prestigious law firms. Dr. Williams mentioned the competition during our constitutional law class, explaining that it was incredibly competitive, typically drawing applications from pre-law students at Emory, Georgia Tech, University of Georgia, and other top institutions across the Southeast. Previous winners had gone on to clerk for federal judges, work at major law firms, and even serve in state government. The theme this year is employment discrimination in the modern workplace, she said, looking directly at me as she spoke. Contestants must write a legal brief analyzing a real or hypothetical case of workplace discrimination and propose legal remedies. The deadline is November 15th, which gives you 6 weeks to research, write, and submit. Maya, I think you'd have a unique perspective on this topic. That night, instead of going to my Target shift, I called in sick for the first time in 2 years and spent the entire evening outlining my brief. I knew exactly what case I wanted to analyze, not a hypothetical one, but a real one happening right under everyone's noses at Henderson and Associates. The brief would be titled, The Subtle Systemics: How Modern Workplace Discrimination Hides Behind Performance Reviews and Corporate Culture. I would use my own experience as a case study, carefully anonymized to protect legal boundaries while illustrating the sophisticated ways that discrimination had evolved in the 21st century. For the next 3 weeks, I threw myself into research with an intensity that bordered on obsession. I documented every incident of discrimination I'd experienced, cross-referenced employment law precedents, and built a case that was both personal and legally sound. I analyzed patterns of behavior, reviewed company policies, and even conducted anonymous surveys of other minority employees at Henderson and Associates. What I discovered was shocking and heartbreaking. I wasn't the only one experiencing discrimination. Through careful, confidential conversations, I learned that 3 other black employees had been passed over for promotions despite superior qualifications. Marcus Williams, a talented account manager, had been told he needed to develop his leadership presence, code for being less threatening to white colleagues. Keisha Thompson, a brilliant data analyst, had been relegated to diversity marketing projects despite her expertise in financial modeling. 2 Latino employees had similar stories. Carlos Rodriguez, despite having an MBA from Georgia Tech, was consistently assigned to campaigns targeting Hispanic consumers, as if his ethnicity limited his professional scope. Maria Santos had been told her accent might be confusing to clients, despite her flawless English and deep understanding of market dynamics. An Asian American colleague, Jennifer Kim, had been consistently excluded from leadership meetings despite being the department's top performer in client retention. When she asked about advancement opportunities, she was told she needed to be more aggressive and speak up more, criticisms that were never leveled at her quieter white male colleagues. My legal brief became more than just a competition entry. It became a manifesto documenting the systematic exclusion of talented people based on race, ethnicity, and coded assumptions about cultural fit. I analyzed how discrimination had evolved from overt segregation to subtle exclusion, from explicit bias to coded language and double standards. I worked on it every spare moment, during lunch breaks, between Target shifts, on weekends. My apartment became a law library with legal textbooks stacked on every surface, case law printouts covering my kitchen table, and sticky notes marking important precedents on my bathroom mirror. My mother noticed my renewed energy and asked what I was working on. "I'm writing about workplace discrimination," I told her one evening as she helped me organize my research. "You mean what's happening to you at that job?" she asked, her voice tight with anger she'd been holding back for months. "Yes, but bigger than that. I'm documenting how it works, how it's changed, how people like Mr. Richardson can destroy careers while claiming they're just maintaining standards." My mother smiled with pride, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her in weeks. "Baby, you're not just writing about discrimination," she said. "You're documenting your strength. You're turning their weapons into your armor." The night before the submission deadline, I made a decision that would change everything. I printed out copies of my brief and placed one on every desk at Henderson and Associates before anyone arrived for work. I included a cover letter explaining that this was my entry into the state bar competition, and that while the case study was anonymized for legal purposes, it was based on real experiences at our company. I also scheduled a meeting with HR that morning, armed with documentation, witness statements, and a formal complaint about the hostile work environment I'd endured. My hands shook as I prepared the presentation, but my voice was steady when I practiced my opening statement in the mirror. "My name is Maya Johnson," I said to my reflection, "and I'm here to document how discrimination works in modern corporate America." When Mr. Richardson arrived that morning and found the brief on his desk, his face went through a spectrum of emotions: confusion, recognition, and finally rage. I watched from my cubicle as he read the title page, his face growing redder with each sentence. By 10 a.m. I was called into his office. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, waving the brief in the air like evidence of a crime. "This is completely inappropriate. You're making serious accusations without any proof. This is defamatory, libelous, and completely unprofessional." "Actually," I said calmly, sitting straight in the chair across from his desk, "everything in that brief is meticulously documented and legally sound. I have witnesses, recorded incidents, and a pattern of discriminatory behavior that violates both federal employment law and company policy." His face reddened further. "You're being dramatic. You're turning normal workplace feedback into some kind of discrimination conspiracy. This is exactly the kind of victim mentality I was talking about. You can't handle constructive criticism, so you cry racism." "Victim mentality?" I repeated, standing up from my chair. "Mr. Richardson, let me tell you what the victim mentality looks like. The victim mentality is working 3 jobs to pay for law school while being called lazy. Victim mentality is having your ideas stolen and repackaged as someone else's innovation while being told you lack creativity. The victim mentality is being questioned about your commitment while working more hours than anyone else in this department." He started to interrupt, but I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. "What you're seeing right now isn't a victim mentality. This is what accountability looks like. This is what happens when you underestimate someone's intelligence, work ethic, and legal knowledge. This is what happens when you assume that a tired black woman is lazy rather than brilliant." Just then Janet knocked on the door. "Maya? HR would like to see you. And Mr. Richardson, Mr. Henderson wants to speak with you immediately." As I walked toward the HR office, I passed my coworkers' desks. Some looked at me with newfound respect, others seemed nervous, and a few were reading my brief intently, highlighting passages and taking notes. Carlos Rodriguez caught my eye and nodded approvingly. Jennifer Kim gave me a small smile that said she understood exactly what I'd done and why. The HR meeting was professional but tense. Ms. Patricia Coleman, the HR director, was a black woman in her 50s who had worked her way up through various corporations. She listened to my presentation carefully, asking thoughtful questions and taking detailed notes. "Maya," she said finally, "these are serious allegations that require a full investigation. We'll need to interview witnesses, review documentation, and examine patterns of behavior across the department. In the meantime, I'm recommending that you be transferred to a different department to avoid any potential retaliation." "Actually," I said, "I have a better solution. I've been accepted to Emory Law School for the fall semester. I'd like to request a leave of absence to focus on my education, with the understanding that this discrimination complaint will be fully investigated regardless of my employment status." Ms. Coleman raised an eyebrow. "Law school? That explains the quality of this legal brief. It's remarkably sophisticated for someone without formal legal training. When do you start?" "August 15th. But first, I need to hear back from the state bar competition. Winners will be announced next Friday." She smiled for the first time during our meeting. Maya, I have a feeling you're going to do very well in law school. And I want you to know that we take these allegations seriously. Changes will be made. The following Friday arrived with the crisp promise of autumn in Georgia. Golden leaves drifted past the windows of the Georgian Terrace Hotel in downtown Atlanta, where the State Bar Competition Award ceremony was being held. I had taken the day off from all my jobs, a luxury I rarely afforded myself, to attend the ceremony that would determine my financial future. I sat in the ornate ballroom, surrounded by pre-law students from the state's most prestigious universities. Most were impeccably dressed in expensive suits, chatting confidently about their family connections to prominent law firms and their summer internships at prestigious companies. I felt momentarily out of place in my department store blazer, the nicest piece of professional clothing I owned, but then I remembered Dr. Williams' words, "Your worth isn't measured by your wardrobe. It's measured by your work." The ceremony began with speeches from prominent Atlanta attorneys and judges. Judge Margaret Harrison, a distinguished black woman who served on the Georgia Court of Appeals, spoke about the importance of diversity in the legal profession and the need for lawyers who understood the real-world impact of discrimination. "The law is not abstract," she said, her voice carrying across the ballroom. "It affects real people facing real challenges. We need attorneys who have lived these challenges, who understand them not just intellectually but emotionally." Finally, the moment arrived, the announcement of the competition winner. My heart pounded as Judge Harrison approached the podium, holding a sealed envelope. "This year's submissions were exceptionally strong," she said, her voice steady and authoritative. "We received over 200 briefs from students across the Southeast. But one brief stood out not just for its legal analysis, but for its courage in addressing systemic discrimination in the modern workplace." I gripped the arms of my chair, hardly daring to breathe. Around me, other students shifted nervously, some checking their phones, others staring intently at the judge. The winning brief, titled "The Subtle Systemics: How Modern Workplace Discrimination Hides Behind Performance Reviews and Corporate Culture," presents a compelling case study that demonstrates how discrimination has evolved in the 21st century. The author combines personal insight with rigorous legal scholarship to create a document that is both academically sound and deeply human. My vision blurred slightly. Could this really be happening? This brief doesn't just document discrimination. It provides a roadmap for identifying and combating it. The legal analysis is sophisticated, the research is thorough, and the writing is compelling. But what makes this brief exceptional is its authenticity. This author didn't just study discrimination, she lived it, documented it, and fought back against it. Judge Harrison paused, looking out over the audience. The winner of this year's competition and recipient of the $50,000 scholarship and legal internship is Maya Johnson from Georgia State University. The applause thundered through the ballroom, but I barely heard it. I was thinking about my mother, about all those nights she came home exhausted from cleaning offices, her hands cracked and bleeding but her spirit unbroken. I was thinking about every time someone had underestimated us, about Mr. Richardson's sneer as he called me lazy, about every microaggression that had tried to convince me I didn't belong. As I walked to the podium on unsteady legs, Judge Harrison whispered, "Your brief made me cry, child. And then it made me proud. You're going to be a formidable attorney." Standing at the podium, looking out at an audience of future lawyers, judges, and legal professionals, I felt a surge of emotion that threatened to overwhelm me. I thought about all the people who had doubted me, all the obstacles I'd overcome, all the nights I'd fallen asleep studying while my peers were partying. "Thank you," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "This scholarship doesn't just represent financial support for my education. It represents validation for everyone who has been told they don't belong, who has been called lazy while working multiple jobs, who has been questioned about their commitment while sacrificing everything for their dreams." The audience applauded again and I saw tears in several eyes. I want to dedicate this award to my mother, who taught me that education is the only thing they can't take away from you. To Dr. Williams, who showed me that knowledge is power. And to everyone who faces discrimination in their workplace, your experiences are valid, your voices matter, and change is possible. The scholarship meant I could quit my night jobs and focus entirely on law school. The internship would provide invaluable experience and networking opportunities. But more importantly, I had proven to myself, and to everyone who had doubted me, that I belonged in any room I chose to enter. After the ceremony, dozens of people approached me. Law firm partners handed me business cards, judges offered mentorship, and fellow students congratulated me with genuine admiration. But the moment that mattered most came when an older black woman approached me near the exit. "Young lady, she said, extending her hand. My name is Judge Beverly Martin. I served on the federal appellate court for 30 years. I want you to know that your brief reminded me why I became a lawyer in the first place. You didn't just win a competition. You wrote a document that will help others understand and fight discrimination. She handed me her card. When you graduate from law school, I'd like you to consider clerking for one of my former colleagues. This country needs lawyers like you. The next Monday, I returned to Henderson and Associates to clean out my desk and submit my formal resignation. The office felt different somehow, smaller, less intimidating. Several colleagues congratulated me on the scholarship, and I could see a mixture of respect and regret in their eyes. Some seemed embarrassed about how they had treated me, others appeared genuinely happy for my success. Janet approached me as I packed my personal items into a small cardboard box. Maya, I want you to know that your brief has sparked some important conversations here. Upper management is implementing mandatory bias training, reviewing promotion practices across all departments, and establishing a formal complaint process for discrimination issues. What about Mr. Richardson? I asked. Janet's expression grew serious. He's been placed on administrative leave pending the completion of the HR investigation. Between your documentation and statements from other employees, there's a clear pattern of discriminatory behavior. I don't think he'll be coming back. As I was leaving, I passed Mr. Richardson in the hallway. He looked disheveled, older somehow, as if the weight of his actions had finally caught up with him. He stopped and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, a mixture of anger, confusion, and perhaps a trace of respect. Congratulations, he said stiffly. I heard about your scholarship. Thank you, I replied. I suppose this proves I wasn't lacking drive after all. He opened his mouth as if to say something else, then closed it and walked away. I never saw him again, but I heard through the company grapevine that he was asked to resign a few months later during a company-wide review of management practices. 3 weeks later, I received an unexpected visitor at my mother's house. Dr. Williams stood on our front porch, holding a wrapped gift and wearing a broad smile. I wanted to give you something before law school starts, she said, handing me the package. Inside was a beautiful leather-bound journal with my initials embossed in gold. On the first page she had written, "For Maya, document your journey. Your story will inspire others to find their voice. Remember that every barrier you break makes the path easier for those who follow." As I held the journal, I realized that my experience at Henderson and Associates hadn't been a setback. It had been preparation. Every microaggression had taught me to recognize injustice. Every moment of doubt had strengthened my resolve. Every challenge had equipped me with the tools I would need as a lawyer fighting for others who faced similar discrimination. That evening, I sat on my mother's front porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. My mother joined me, bringing 2 glasses of sweet tea and settling into the old rocking chair where she used to help me with homework. "I'm proud of you, baby," she said, her voice soft with emotion. "Not just for winning that competition but for fighting back. For refusing to let them break your spirit." "I learned from the best," I replied, squeezing her hand. "You taught me that hard work pays off, that education is power, and that dignity can't be taken away, it can only be given up." We sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. I thought about the journey ahead, law school, the bar exam, building a career fighting for justice. It wouldn't be easy, but I was ready. I was no longer the woman who had trembled in that conference room when Mr. Richardson called her lazy. I was a warrior who had transformed discrimination into determination, obstacles into opportunities, and doubt into unshakable confidence. Today, as I sit in the law library at Emory University, surrounded by case books and constitutional precedents, I often think about that conference room where Mr. Richardson called me lazy. I think about the young woman who sat there, trembling with humiliation, unsure if she belonged in that corporate world. That woman was not weak, though she felt weak at that moment. She was not lazy, though she was called lazy by someone who had never worked a day for anything that wasn't given to him. She was not lacking in drive, though she was made to question her own ambition. She was a warrior in training, learning to fight battles she didn't even know existed yet. It's been 2 years since that day, and I'm now in my final semester of law school. I graduated summa cum laude, served as editor of the Law Review, and have already accepted a position at a civil rights law firm specializing in employment discrimination. My client list includes teachers, nurses, engineers, and executives, people from all walks of life who have been told they don't belong, who have been called lazy while working harder than their critics ever have. I've learned that racism in America has evolved. It rarely announces itself with burning crosses or segregated water fountains anymore. Instead, it whispers in performance reviews, lurks in networking events, and hides behind phrases like cultural fit and professional demeanor. It judges your energy when you're working 3 jobs, questions your commitment when you're sacrificing everything for your dreams, and calls you lazy when you're the hardest working person in the room. But I've also learned that we have power, more power than they want us to realize. We have the power of documentation, of legal knowledge, of refusing to internalize their limitations. We have the power of excellence, of persistence, of proving them wrong not with our words, but with our achievements. Every Black woman who has ever been called aggressive for advocating for herself, every Latino worker who has been pigeonholed into diversity roles, every Asian employee who has been passed over for leadership despite superior qualifications. You are not imagining it. Your experiences are valid. Your feelings are justified. And your response can change everything. Dr. Williams was right when she told me that knowledge is power. But I've learned that documented knowledge is unstoppable. When you face discrimination, write it down. Record dates, times, witnesses, exact quotes. Build your case methodically because the law is on your side when you have evidence. Don't just survive their discrimination. Document it, challenge it, and use it as fuel for your own success. Turn their underestimation into your motivation. Let their doubt become your determination. My mother still works at the same cleaning company, but now she owns it. She used the money I was able to give her from my scholarship and internship to buy out her former employer. Baby, she told me on the day she signed the papers, I spent 30 years cleaning other people's messes. Now it's time to build something of my own. Mr. Richardson never found another executive position in Atlanta. Word travels fast in corporate circles, especially when HR investigations uncover patterns of discriminatory behavior. I heard he moved to a smaller city, took a lower-level position, and learned to keep his opinions about other people's work ethic to himself. The other employees at Henderson and Associates who faced discrimination? Marcus Williams was promoted to senior account manager and is now one of the company's top performers. Keisha Thompson was transferred to the financial analysis department where her skills are valued and recognized. Carlos Rodriguez started his own marketing consultancy and landed several major clients, including some who left Henderson and Associates to work with him. Change is possible, but it requires courage. It requires documentation. It requires the willingness to speak truth to power, even when your voice shakes. They called me lazy because they couldn't fathom the strength it takes to work 3 jobs while pursuing a law degree. They questioned my commitment because they had never sacrificed comfort for dreams. They doubted my abilities because recognizing my talent would force them to examine their own mediocrity. But here's what they didn't understand. Every night I stocked shelves after a full day of marketing work, I was building character. Every weekend I served tables while studying constitutional law, I was developing resilience. Every moment I chose dignity over comfort, I was preparing for battles they couldn't even imagine. I'm not lazy. I'm not lacking in drive. I'm not a diversity hire or a charity case or someone who expects things to be handed to her. I am a Black woman in America who refuses to be diminished by small minds and smaller hearts. I am a daughter of a woman who cleaned offices to pay for my education. I am a future attorney who will fight for every person who has ever been called lazy while working harder than their critics ever have. They judged me by my circumstances. I showed them the power of my dreams. They saw my exhaustion. I showed them my excellence. They called me lazy. I proved them wrong. And to every young woman reading this, every person who has been underestimated, overlooked, or dismissed, remember that their opinion of you is not your reality. Their limitations are not your boundaries. Their fear of your potential is not your problem. Work hard, document everything, know your worth, and never let anyone convince you that you're asking for too much when you're simply demanding what you deserve. The law degree hanging on my wall isn't just my achievement. It's my answer to everyone who ever doubted that a tired young Black woman from East Atlanta could transform their discrimination into her triumph. That's not laziness. That's legacy. Maya Johnson graduated summa cum laude from Emory University School of Law in 2025 and now practices employment discrimination law with Johnson & Associates civil rights firm in Atlanta, Georgia. She has won landmark cases protecting workers' rights and speaks nationally about modern workplace discrimination. Her legal brief, The Subtle Systemics, is now used in law schools across the country as a teaching tool for understanding contemporary civil rights issues. She was recently featured on the cover of Georgia Lawyer magazine as one of the 30 under 30 rising stars in civil rights law.